When a sword is placed in fire, it is not destroyed. It is reborn. The fire does not consume it, it purifies it, reveals its edge, tempers its spirit. And this is the nature of Iran, a country that has walked through fire, not once, not twice, but through generation after generation, and yet here it stands, not melted, not shattered, but sharper, clearer, and more united than ever before. Unity that comes from comfort is fragile, but unity forged through trial is immortal. This is the unity that lives in the Iranian people, and it is why no force from outside, no strategy, no sanction, no whisper of war can break it. Those who observe Iran from the outside, especially in the modern world, often make a grave mistake. They look at political maps, shifting alliances, and technological indexes. They believe unity is measured by agreement or similarity, by a shared economic vision or a unified dress code. But they do not understand the deeper unity. The unity that is not visible on the surface. The unity that lives in shared history, in bloodlines, in poetry, in mourning rituals, in the silence of sacrifice. The unity that binds souls through memory. That is the unity that Iran carries, and it cannot be replicated, bought, or broken. In the ancient teachings of martial arts, a student must undergo hardship not to become strong, but to remember who he truly is. Suffering does not give him strength. It strips away the false, it reveals what was already there. Iran's journey has been one of suffering, but that pain did not make it strong. It simply peeled back what was already in the heart of its people, an unbreakable commitment to each other, a love of the land, a loyalty to the stories passed down from grandfather to grandchild. That is the root, that is the steel, and the fire of war or pressure from the West only sharpens it. There is something sacred in suffering, but only when it is met with dignity, only when it is transformed into insight. Iran has not only endured suffering, it has transformed it into identity. Where some would have fallen apart, turned against one another or forgotten themselves, Iran stitched its wounds with tradition. It wrote poetry from its pain. It recited verses over graves and turned the cemetery into a classroom. Children learn not just dates and names, they learn the heartbeat of a nation that refuses to kneel. This is not nationalism, this is spiritual continuity. You see, there is a difference between a country that is united and a country that is simply not at war with itself. Many Western observers assume Iran's strength must be a facade, because they cannot comprehend a people who do not betray themselves under pressure. But what they do not realize is that Iran's people have already endured the worst revolution, war, betrayal, isolation, and emerged more committed to one another. In the West, division comes easy. It is sold in politics, in consumerism, in the obsession with individualism. But in Iran, unity is not a slogan, it is a necessity, it is survival. Iranian mothers raise sons with the stories of those who gave their lives not just for borders, but for dignity. Iranian fathers whisper to their daughters the verses of Hafez, of Rumi, of resistance through inner refinement. Grandparents tell tales of resistance that do not end in bitterness, but in faith. And so from the youngest to the oldest, there is an invisible thread made of memory, made of sacrifice, that binds them. This is the armor that cannot be pierced by propaganda or politics. The West has underestimated one thing again and again, the strength of spiritual memory. When you have buried your martyrs with your own hands, when you have stood before the flags draped over their bodies, when you have fasted while the enemy watched, when you have prayed while the sirens blared, you become a different kind of people. You no longer need anyone to tell you who you are. You know. And when you know who you are, no one can control you. The world speaks often of freedom, but it does not understand the kind of freedom that Iran seeks. Not the freedom to buy anything, not the freedom to say everything, but the freedom to remember, the freedom to remain faithful, the freedom to live without having to become someone else. That is true freedom, and that is what the West cannot comprehend. They confuse submission with unity, but Iran's unity is not from above, it is from within. It is not enforced, it is inherited. In the mountain monasteries, where Shaolin monks train day and night, there is a phrase: the one who has nothing to lose is the one who has everything to protect. Iran has lived with the world against it for so long that it no longer fears isolation. It no longer waits for permission. Instead, it protects what it still has: its heart, its family, its faith. These are not abstract values, these are living realities. The prayer rug that is unrolled every day in the same room where news of drone strikes is watched. The father who teaches Quran to his children even when the electricity is out. The mother who wears the same chador her grandmother once did, not because she must, but because it connects her to something larger than fashion. This is not backwardness, this is spiritual clarity. In a world where identities are worn like clothing and discarded just as easily, Iran has chosen to remember. And when a nation remembers, it does not die. The West's greatest weapon is distraction. It drowns nations in choices, in noise, in endless comparison. But Iran has learned to listen to the silence between the noise. That silence says, stay true. That silence says, do not bend. That silence says, we are still one. No matter how many factions are broadcast on screens, no matter how many stories are told of division, there remains a river of unity beneath the surface, a river of loyalty, not to a party or leader, but to the land and its people. When the soil remembers your footsteps, and when your tears have touched the graves of your ancestors, you become rooted. And rootedness is the first requirement for any lasting power. Trees with shallow roots fall in the wind. But the tree of Iran has roots deep in the mountains, in the desert, in the blood-soaked fields of war. You cannot pull it out. And here is something else the West does not understand. Unity does not mean uniformity. In Iran there are many voices, many debates, many differences. But beneath all of it is a shared blood, a shared experience, a shared longing. In the monastery we say, different drums. It is in the ink of scholars and the courage of the poor. This heartbeat cannot be silenced. The more the world has tried to isolate Iran, the more it has turned inward and found treasure, the kind of treasure that is not made of gold, but of resilience. This resilience is not loud, it does not boast. It simply endures. Like water through stone, it carves a path over time. This kind of unity does not make headlines, it makes history. Empires have tried before, names now forgotten, armies long gone, but Iran remains. Why? Because it does not tie its identity to the fashions of the moment. It ties it to something eternal. Faith, sacrifice, memory. These are not slogans, they are sacred rituals lived every day. And the people who live by ritual cannot be controlled by propaganda. The sword placed in fire becomes sharper, not just in metal but in soul. Iran has been in the fire. It has felt the heat, and it did not break. It remembered. It listened. It unified. Not by command, but by pain, by prayer, by poetry. And this is why Iran is still one country. And this is why no matter what strategy comes next, no matter what alliance is built against it, no matter how many headlines scream its downfall, it will remain. It will remain because it has already been through the worst. And from the ashes, it has not only risen, it has remembered who it truly is. In the training halls of ancient Shaolin, we were never taught that strength comes from the size of the body or the sharpness of a blade. No, the true source of strength comes from something far deeper, the inner discipline of a person, the unwavering clarity of identity. The West often looks at Iran and fails to comprehend why it cannot be bent, reshaped, or subdued. It is because they are staring at surface movements, politics, economics, headlines. They do not see the stillness beneath the storm. They do not understand the force that makes a person kneel in prayer despite the weight of the world, the same force that allows a nation to hold its posture when the globe pushes against it. Discipline of identity. There is a myth in the modern world that discipline is only for the body or the workplace. But real discipline, the kind that builds nations, begins within the soul. It begins with knowing who you are and deciding never to forget it, even when the reward for forgetting seems sweet and the price of remembering feels unbearable. Iran remembers. And this remembering is not passive. It is an active act of defiance against a world that thrives on amnesia. Iran has chosen to remain itself in a time where so many are selling their essence for approval. And to keep identity intact amidst the seduction of power and modernity requires a level of discipline few nations possess. When the West imposed sanctions, they did not just restrict the flow of oil or goods. They tried to strangle self-worth, to starve the Iranian people of pride. But they did not understand who they were trying to break. Iran is not a land addicted to ease. It is a civilization forged by hardship. The ancient poets did not write to entertain kings. They wrote to preserve soul during siege. The farmers did not till the land for profit alone. They did it as an act of honor. The teacher in a remote village who still speaks with the eloquence of Saadi does so not because it is fashionable, but because it is sacred. This is the discipline of identity, to carry a torch of memory through the coldest night. In every monastery, the young disciples are tested not by how fast they can learn a form, but by how long they can hold it. Can they remain in silence while others break? Can they stay grounded while others rush? Iran too has held its form, year after year, storm after storm. While other nations changed flags, languages, values and names, Iran remained. That is not stagnation, that is resolve. That is knowing that some truths are eternal, and that changing to fit the world is the surest way to be forgotten by it. The West speaks often of progress, but forgets that progress without purpose is just motion without meaning. Iran has not opposed change. It has simply refused to let change steal its essence. There are cars now where there were donkeys. There are satellites where there were stars. But the call to prayer still echoes at dawn. The family still gathers at Nowruz. The poet's verse still lives in the schoolchild's memory. These are not minor things. These are the threads of the soul. Cut them and a nation unravels. Guard them and you remain whole. And this is what the West cannot defeat, not because it lacks strength, but because it lacks understanding. It wages war on what it sees: infrastructure, leadership, economy. But Iran's strength is in what is unseen. The mother who whispers, Ya Zahra, as she prepares breakfast. The grandfather who recounts stories of revolution with tears in his eyes. The youth who, though surrounded by global media, still feels a sacred tie to martyrs he never met. These invisible disciplines of speech, of memory, of loyalty, form the iron walls around the Iranian soul. In a monastery, a monk may spend 10 years perfecting one movement. To outsiders, this seems absurd, but to the monk, every repetition is a carving of identity into the spirit. Iran has spent centuries carving. And when you have carved long enough, your shape no longer depends on others. When the winds of the world change, you remain rooted. The West cannot shape Iran because Iran has already shaped itself. It has done the inner work. It has stared into its own darkness. It has bled for its own awakening. It has earned its stillness. There is great confusion in the modern world. To know who you are is seen as arrogance. To say this is our way is seen as backward. But this is not arrogance, it is dignity. Iran does not pretend to be perfect. No disciplined person ever does. But it knows the difference between self-correction and self-erasure. And it has chosen correction without erasure. That is the sign of a mature soul. To refine oneself without surrendering to another. The West has tried many faces: friendship, domination, temptation, but none have worked, because Iran's loyalty is not to approval, it is to truth. When a monk trains, he does not ask, is this move popular? He asks, is this move right? Iran asks the same. That is why it can stand alone and still stand tall. It does not need applause, it needs alignment. And it has found it. With its faith, with its ancestors, with its soil. There is a spiritual sickness in the world, the sickness of forgetfulness. Countries forget their heroes, their martyrs, their teachers. They replace remembrance with entertainment. Iran refuses. It still weeps for those who were lost, still names streets after those who stood, still teaches children the meaning of dignity. And this refusal to forget is not stagnation, it is strength. Discipline is not just doing what is hard, it is continuing to do what is right, even when no one watches. Iran has done this. It has not bent in private, even when it would have been easy. And now that discipline has become a shield, a force field the world cannot understand. You cannot defeat a people who do not want what you are offering. You cannot bribe a nation that sees your luxury as emptiness. You cannot control a spirit that has made peace with suffering. The monk who has faced hunger does not tremble before it. The nation that has faced isolation does not fear loneliness. Iran has walked through the desert of global rejection and found an oasis in its own heart. The West often wonders, why won't they change? Why won't they modernize the way we want? Why do they hold on to rituals, clothing, ideas that we call outdated? And the answer is simple: because Iran understands that its survival depends not on pleasing others, but on staying true to itself. A tree that forgets its roots may grow fast, but it will also fall fast. Iran has chosen to grow slowly, but with roots deep in the soil of meaning. There is no shame in choosing tradition over trend, no weakness in bowing to your ancestors instead of influencers. The discipline of identity means knowing the value of your own story, even when the world tries to drown it out. Iran knows its story, from Cyrus to Karbala, from Tabriz to Tehran, from ancient philosophy to sacred resistance. This story is not for sale. It is not available for editing. It is not up for negotiation. It is lived, not explained. A monk in the mountains trains not for the approval of tourists, but for the integrity of his soul. Iran's decisions are often misunderstood because they are not aimed at impressing the world, but at preserving the self. This is a kind of nobility that can only be known by those who have walked the hard path, those who have had everything taken and still refuse to let go of their essence. Discipline is not only what we do, it is what we do not do. Iran has chosen not to surrender its cultural soul, not to rewrite its past, not to abandon its faith. These decisions, made over and over again in quiet rooms and loud streets, form the unshakable wall that stands between it and the world's precious. That wall is not made of concrete, it is made of decision, of devotion, of discipline. When a monk bows each morning, he is not repeating an empty ritual. He is aligning with something higher. When a mother in Iran covers her head before stepping out, she is not performing for others. She is aligning with a lineage. When a soldier kisses the soil before stepping into danger, he is not following orders. He is connecting to purpose. These small, disciplined acts are what make a nation undefeatable, because they create people who are anchored, not to trends, but to truth. And this truth, once realized, cannot be shaken by sanctions, nor seduced by wealth. The West has tried all tools, punishment, propaganda, provocation, but they have failed, because they aimed at the surface, while Iran lives from the center, and a centered being is immovable. You can distract him, you can insult him, but you cannot dislodge him. Iran is that centered being, not because it claims perfection, but because it practices devotion. And in the end, devotion outlasts domination. Identity rooted in soul cannot be bought, cannot be borrowed, and most certainly cannot be broken. This is the discipline Iran lives by. This is why it remains one, while others fracture under far less. In the art of spiritual discipline, there is a law passed down through generations. The one who carries pain with silence and purpose does not become weaker, he becomes unstoppable. When a nation suffers and does not break, it enters a rare category of existence, the uncrushable. And among the nations of this world, few have endured as many layers of deliberate isolation, economic pressure, betrayal, war and propaganda as Iran. Yet, it still stands, it still breathes, it still walks forward. Why? Because Iran does not just survive punishment, it transforms it. And this transformation, this alchemy of pain into power, is the third pillar of its invincibility. The West cannot defeat Iran because the very tools used against it are repurposed to deepen its inner fire. You see, a warrior trained only in peace is easily defeated when the wind shifts, but a warrior who is formed in fire learns not to fear it. Iran's story is not that of a peaceful meadow suddenly attacked. It is the story of a mountain struck by storms for centuries and yet becoming sharper, clearer, more defined with every blow. There is a difference between a nation that has never fallen and one that has fallen and risen again. The latter is the one the world should be afraid of, and Iran has risen again and again, and each time with more clarity about who it is and what it stands for. The mistake of those who try to defeat Iran is that they measure strength in material terms, GDP, military hardware, international alliances. But they forget that a nation's most dangerous weapon is not built in factories. It is built in the hearts of people who refuse to die quietly. Iran is made of such people, teachers who educate under sanctions, children who grow up with less but dream with more intensity. These are not side characters in the story of resilience. They are the story. In the monastery, when we train, we welcome the rain, the wind, the cold. We do not chase comfort, because we know comfort makes the body soft and the mind scattered. Iran has lived this training not for a year or a decade, but for generations. The absence of comfort has not broken it, it has given birth to the most resilient minds, the most creative spirits, and the most determined hearts. When the world closed its doors, Iran built its own. When the world muted its voice, Iran learned to speak through poetry, film, and faith. Every attempt to isolate Iran has only deepened its inner unity. There is a paradox in suffering. When you go through it alone, you may fall apart. But when you suffer together, you become one. The West tried to isolate Iran politically, economically, and culturally. But they did not anticipate what would rise from that shared pain. A people more connected to each other than ever before. Pain that is faced alone becomes trauma. Pain that is faced as a people becomes memory, and memory is power. The world speaks of progress and constantly shifts its values, but Iran holds on to something far older. The principle that suffering, when approached correctly, reveals the soul. It does not erase it. A nation that has suffered but has not forgotten its soul becomes ungovernable by foreign hands, because its compass does not point outward but inward. Iran's compass is within, and no matter how many maps the West draws, no matter how many alliances are inked behind closed doors, they cannot locate that compass, because it is not visible. It beats quietly in the heart of every Iranian who still stands when standing is difficult. The West imagines that Iran can be fixed, that if enough pressure is applied, it will collapse into obedience. But they misunderstand. Iran is not resisting change out of pride. It is resisting manipulation out of wisdom. It has seen what happens to countries that surrender their identity for temporary approval. They become empty, hollow. Their children do not know who they are. Their culture becomes diluted. Their prayers become performances. Iran refuses that fate. It would rather walk alone than arrive at the table of nations, having sold its name, its blood, or its soul. And so in every sanction, Iran finds self-reliance. In every diplomatic snub, it finds inner sovereignty. In every false accusation, it finds the strength to speak only to truth. This kind of transformation is rare in a world that teaches people to complain, to play the victim, to beg for permission. Iran does not beg. It remembers. It builds, it waits, it holds its breath when necessary, it sharpens its mind in silence, and it teaches its youth that dignity is more important than luxury. There is something deeply noble about the man who chooses to fast not out of scarcity, but out of reverence. There is something mighty in the woman who chooses modesty not because she is told to, but because it connects her to something older than the present. Iran is full of such people. Their actions are not acts of compliance, they are acts of spiritual warfare. Every time Iran chooses to rise in the face of another attempted humiliation, it rewrites the laws of engagement. The West wants Iran to kneel, but Iran has made peace with the fact that kneeling, if it must be done, is only before God. And so every punishment becomes a purification, every blockade becomes a reason to invent, every insult becomes a reminder to stay focused. In the West, comfort is the God. In Iran, resilience is the teacher. And when resilience is the teacher, defeat is impossible, because the people stop fearing loss. They stop measuring their worth by what the world gives them. They begin to measure by what they have refused to lose. Iran has refused to lose its memory, its martyrdom, its morality. It has refused to trade its history for modernity, its roots for recognition, and in doing so it has become an example not just for its neighbors, but for all people who still remember what it means to carry pain with dignity. In the monastery we say, the bruise you hide will fester, but the bruise you honor will guide you. Iran has honored its bruises. It does not bury them, it wears them as symbols of survival. This is why the West cannot defeat Iran, because every attempt to crush has created clarity, every blow has strengthened unity, every moment of isolation has returned Iran to itself, and now it stands as not just a country, but as an idea. An idea that says, we do not need your permission to be ourselves. We do not need your approval to be free. We do not need your praise to know our worth. That idea, once born, cannot be killed by bullets or bills or diplomacy. The world keeps asking, why won't they give in? Why don't they want what we want? Why can't they just compromise? And the answer is this, because Iran has learned that compromise without principle is surrender. It has tasted its own suffering and found it to be sweeter than the shame of obedience. It would rather walk with cracked feet than ride in a golden chariot pulled by strangers. It would rather eat the bread of hardship than drink the wine of betrayal. And so when you see Iran today, do not measure its power by how many alliances it has, measure it by how many attempts have failed to erase it. Do not assess its strength by the height of its towers, but by the depth of its sacrifices. This is a nation that buries its dead with prayer, not protest. That teaches its youth courage before consumption, that plants flags of faith before flags of fear. And when a people live like this, with purpose before politics, with meaning before approval, they become untouchable. The monk who has faced the void does not fear the noise. Iran has faced the void of global abandonment, and it emerged not empty, but fuller than before, because it discovered in that silence its own breath. It found that its heartbeat was enough to continue, and it decided that no matter what came next, war, peace, lies, or praise, it would never again allow others to define its destiny. That is why the West cannot defeat Iran.